This just happened a few days ago, and I'm extremely shaken up. For some backstory, I live on the second floor of a 3-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all the apartments. We aren't sure why it's there, but we all have stuff in it. None of us would even attempt to go inside of it. The other night, the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out or anything yet. I walk through my living room where I see a short woman on my fire escape looking into my windows. This is extremely bizarre considering it is still semi-light out and she had literally got out onto the fire escape somehow. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches. She was looking in both and didn't see me. I crawl onto the ground. My heart was racing as I watched her trying to open the windows. I didn't know what the hell to do because my phone was in the other room. After what seems to be an eternity, she left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord to call the cops. I come back to the living room and was looking out of the window to see if I can locate her when, all of a sudden, I hear a weird noise coming from the ceiling. We have one of those ceilings that is separated by cork and wood. I look up to see one of the slabs lifted, 2 eyes staring at me. I have no clue how she got into the crawl space so quickly, but I grab a broom next to me and hit her through the ceiling and call the cops. She crawls away. They showed up and searched the place, not finding her until days later when she was on someone else's fire escape. The cops said that she definitely had some hard drugs up there. I'm just glad she's gone and hope she never returns. The creepiest thing to ever happen to me only lasted a few seconds. I was 8 years old. My brother was 6. It was summer. We're sitting alone in the back of my grandmother's car. This was because she had to quickly buy eggs or something, so she parked on the side of the road, right in front of a small grocery store, and left us inside the car. I suppose she thought we'd be alright, since she's only going for a minute, and the locked car was only a feet away from the store. She had only gone for a few seconds when a tall, skinny man stopped next to the car window and then bent down looking in at us. My brother and I are really confused because we didn't know him, so we just stare back at him. He then reaches slowly through with his arm, which was open because it was hot and we didn't have aircon. Now while staring into my eyes, this confuses me even more. I remembered thinking maybe he was gonna remove or fix something inside the car because what he was doing made no sense. He very lightly laid the tip of his index finger on my fire. He just left his finger there, unmoving for a couple of seconds, staring into my eyes with his mouth half open. I remember he was missing teeth. It really didn't last long at all, but it felt like an eternity. Then he pulled his arm away and walks off. My grandmother came back a few seconds after. I wanted to pretend the whole incident never happened, and didn't mention it to her, but my brother told her. She wanted a description, but all we could say is tall, skinny, dark, missing teeth. Unfortunately, there's way too many people in the neighbourhood who fit that description. I felt a little nausea for the rest of the day. This really stuck with me my whole life. Ever since I can remember, I've always been afraid of white utility vans with blocked out back windows. I'm in 6th grade, and I used to pick up my sister, who's in the 1st, from school, and then walk to our restaurant where my mum worked, and hang out for a little while and eat dinner while she's on shift. One day, as we're walking out of our apartment complex and approach the gate, one of those creepy vans pull up on the blocked off gate. He was not trying to exit. He was purposely blocking our path. We slowed down, then the driver hopped out of the car, walking over to the passenger side, opened his door, then started coming running towards us. I freak out immediately, grabbed my sister's hand, yelled run. We ran back to our apartments, as the guy got back into his car and followed us. I locked us in the apartment, and my sister and I hid in our room, staying very quiet. There was a knock at the door, and we were both crying. I called my mum, but since she's working, she doesn't answer. Then I get the guts to look out the window in the living room, and sure enough, the white van's there. Later on, I speak to my mum, and she didn't believe me. When we got home, there's a piece of paper stuck in the door. No writing or anything. So strange. Back in 2011, I was within a circle of friends that made it a tradition to go camping at a certain spot every May long weekend. The spot we chose was in a beautiful area right on the edge of a large lake, and was located on government land. The lake itself had a dam on it, so during May long, the waters were always low, if not completely empty, making it possible to walk across. People are allowed to camp there, as long as they're not causing trouble or making a mess. And it was generally a good time for everyone. The spots themselves were spaced far enough apart that you'd have your own privacy, but not far enough that you couldn't meet other people. In this particular year, our spot's in the middle of a small hill, with one campsite below us and one above. The first part of the night trip happened without incident. During the second day, the people staying at the site below us had moved in. We don't think much of it, continued drinking throughout the day and into the night. At around midnight, the people at the campsite below us are really out of control. Yelling and screaming. Their music had got much louder, so our friend Ben goes down to ask them to turn it down. He was punched in the face. He then comes back to tell us that with 90% certainty they're on drugs. After that, the vibe wasn't relaxed, and we were all somewhat on edge. I was super tired. I just decided to go to bed, with some of my friends still awake, including Ben, and one couple that were visiting another campsite we made friends with on that day. I could hear the campsite below, blasting their music, partying hard, but I just tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I was jolted awake. Parts of this are somewhat a blur. All I know is that I sat straight up as soon as I heard the screaming and yelling coming from outside my tent. I quickly ran outside to find our campsite in chaos. One of my friends is clutching their chest. People were running around screaming for 911. I was quickly informed of what had happened. Apparently, not long after I gone to bed, the people camping at the site below us decided they weren't finished talking to Ben. On their way up, they had encountered Lily and Derek walking back. Now Derek and Ben are about the same height and have the same colour hair, so they assumed that Derek was Ben, bolted to him, hit him on the head with a glass bottle. I didn't know if it was the same guy that showed up later at our campsite, but I was told that everyone was sitting around the campfire when 2 or 3 huge guys appeared from the darkness and walked over to them. One had a paring knife, the other a butcher knife in hands. Ben saw the knives and had gotten up to talk to them, and had barely spoken a word, when the guy with the paring knife stabbed him once in the chest. At the same time, some people from the campsite above had seen the guys come in and came down to help. One of the guys, Tim, was coming down the hill when the guy with the butcher's knife ran up and stabbed him in the stomach. From there, sheer panic ensued. Police called 911, but the ambulance was over an hour away. This is where I come out of the tent. Tim was bleeding profusely, and he was losing blood way too fast. His friends ended up putting him in the back of their car, speeding off to meet the ambulance halfway. Ben was cut too, but not really that deep, so he just waited until the ambulance arrives. The guys ran off into the darkness, back down to their campsite, took off in their Land Rover. My boyfriend at the time and I got into his car and drove to the entrance to try to flag down the policemen on their way to the scene. Once they arrive, they're informed to stay in the car as they had released a sane search unit to hunt down the people who stabbed our friends. By the end of the night, they had arrested the men. They had tried to flee by driving their vehicles across the lake bed, but they got stuck halfway. They were on a concoction of drugs, as suspected. Luckily, both Tim and Ben survived, although Tim lost a lot of blood, taking weeks to recover. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced in my life. Over a decade ago, I boarded a plane and went to explore the grasslands or savannas of Africa. I'd just gotten out of school and had the idea of working with animals and observing their behaviour. I'd spend all night in my tiny apartment reading about encounters, attacks, and stories told by those native to the area. I was quite involved with an online group of people who shared the same interests as me. Some were professors, some were students, biologists even, rangers, and so many more. That's where I met Trick. Well, his name was Patrick, but he hates when people call him that. Our friendship was instant. Soon enough we got in Africa. I know it seems wild and thoughtless, but I was a 23-year-old and adventurous. The world had so much to offer. and I was ready to experience it all. Together, we found a guy who was going to guide us and make sure we stayed within the correct perimeters. He knew the line where safe met dangerous, and observation met attack, a line that we did not want to cross. Our guide's name was Han. He was rugged and intimidating. He smelled like gasoline too. I didn't know why. He wore face-down tanned wrinkles and a constant frown. "You two kids need to understand something," he said. I remembered the gruff, gravelly tone in his voice, like I heard it yesterday. "My word will stay. Whatever I say, you do, or you'll get killed." It sounded as though he had some authority complex, but he shrugged and nodded if we appeared to be disagreeing, so we just smiled and nodded. The air was hot, feathering over my face. The land seemed to stretch on forever. Trees were sparse, but tall. Wispy grass concealed the ground effortlessly. I remembered feeling so small and vulnerable. The sun drowned me in an intense heat. The sweat effortlessly bounced off my face. While we set out our stuff down in a well-built and sturdy tent, Han continued his speech. "We can go out in a few hours if you all want to try and see some lions. They prefer hunting at night." "Sounds good to me." I looked over to Trick, who seemed confident and excited. "Yeah, me too." Trick didn't shut up the entire time when we got our stuff ready to head out. His voice wavered in eagerness, and he was practically bouncing off the walls of the tent. "Mikey, do you think we'll see anything?" "Mikey, do you think they'll see us as prey?" "Mikey, do you think you can stomach watching an animal get murdered in front of you?" The questions did not stop until Han hastily pulled open the door. "Hey," he threw a tightly wadded bag at us. "Here are some supplies. You're gonna need them." We looked at each other. Cotton-scented candles? I looked up to meet Han's eyes. "You'll see why. Don't question me or anything." "Lions must not like the smell of cotton," Trick joked. He then lets out a humorless laugh and says, "It's not just the lions I'm saving you from." Now I'm not gonna lie and say Han's words didn't leave me uneasy. I rationalized by telling myself he meant other predators like hyenas or something. Though, I'd admit, I never heard of using a Pacific scented candle before. The tires on the Jeep cursed over the sand easily, and the breeze dulled the sting of the setting sun. Orange painted the blue sky, leaving a blanket of shade and warmth. After a while, the sky darkens. I saw more stars than I ever have before. God, it is beautiful. "Pretty, isn't it?" he yelled over the engine. "Yeah," I yelled back. He continues driving, and I noticed Trick's comfortable posture on the other side of the Jeep. His arms hung out the window, his hand waving against the wind. We now pulled over, not far behind a huge tree, single tree, with binoculars, a defense weapon, a heavy jacket, our damn candles. We sat up beneath the protection of the truck. Han sat behind us, making sure to light every single candle that we're encircled with. "Why'd you choose this area?" Han said aloud. "I'm not going to say the exact area we went, for later on you'll understand this." Well, I began, but Trick's voice now overpowered mine. "Lots of animals attack here." "Are the lions more aggressive?" "They seem to kill a lot of villagers out here, more than other areas." "That's not why we came," I added in defense, but they both ignored me. Han let out another laugh, and the same sent chills down my entire body. In reality, this excursion was cheaper than any others we looked into, by a mile. Ain't no lion ever attacked no one out here. Both Trick and I began to speak up, but Han held up an index finger. He wanted to silence us. "Hey, there's another predator out there. Even the lions don't mess with. I told you when we first spoke on the phone. This place is dangerous. But you needed to listen to me, to know that everything's fine, okay?" I vaguely remember the first conversation Trick and I had with Han. He made us agree to be completely compliant and understand the various risks of the dangerous encounters before he agreed upon. I didn't press him further, but instead muttering a weak "okay" before gluing my eyes to the binoculars. A long time passed with nothing, not even a word spoken in the cool air. The wind rustled the grass around us, flickering the flame ever so slightly. Then, as though somebody hit the mute button on a television, everything goes dead silent. Not the kind you'd think. I'm talking about deafeningly quiet. No bugs, no sound of the wilderness around us. It's as though we're in a vacuum, and the air felt still, and similar to the way static builds up before a storm. A terrible storm. My whole body goes stiff, like cardboard. Every hair stands on end. Part of me wanted to run off. The other part, desperately trying to listen to the sound of my heart beating. Hands visibly tensed. His eyes are very serious, and he looks at both of us. Softly but sternly, he whispered, "Don't leave the circle." He gestured to the candles around us. "Please." "What's out there?" Trick asks, panic obviously in his face. His hands are now shaking uncontrollably. Han stayed silent, taking in a shallow breath. The flames from the candle lit up to the small space around us, and brought attention to every detail in our worried faces. For the flames, wouldn't they attract attention to us? "Han," I began, "won't the fight—" "No." "Why?" "Shh. Listen." Han's face was now extremely focused, but something in his eyes almost appeared excited even. I could not place a finger upon it. It looked like we all stopped breathing at once, and in the distance, we hear the stampede of feet, but without the similar sound of hoofs. It's a deep thud, rhythmic. I tried to swallow, but my mouth is dry. With binoculars, I scanned the area to see what was approaching, but I see nothing. I watched the grass, the way the blades melted into the black sky. I watched the horizon, then left, to the right, panning over slowly until I saw them. They were black, blacker than the night sky, fast, skinny, and on all fours. The skin covering their visible bones looks wet, glossy. My stomach felt quite uneasy now, and the urge to sprint back to the jeep was so intense that I struggled to keep myself grounded. My eyes were glued though. I could not walk away. With every inhuman movement, quick and jumpy, my heart raced a little bit faster. I knew my body was telling me to run, alerting me, trying to get me away from danger. But my mind told me stay planted, don't move. Now there's 3 of them, running in jerky motions, but in a pack. Not looking like any animal I've ever studied before. I could see the way their muscles moved, below the slim layer of skin that they had. Their bones seemed stretched with every extension of their legs, as though they're rubber. Then, they suddenly stop. All at once, halting, and one stood, on 2 legs. Its hips are curled over. I can see its teeth, they're long and sharp. It stretched its neck, facing upwards towards the sky, smelling the air. Shuffling started. I immediately looked over to Trick and Han. There was a horrified expression on Han's face. Not of horror, not just betrayal, not sadness, but pure dread. All I felt over me was the desperation to escape. My heart dropped. The world is in slow motion now. No nightmare, where time is morphed beyond comprehension. Trick was running towards the jeep. I know he had seen them. His response had kicked in and he bolts. The sound of his boots were excruciatingly loud. But that's nothing compared to the high-pitched scream that come from that thing. My eyes locked with Han's. The world sped up, and I could hear them closing in on Trick. Not that they're very far away in the first place. I felt so numb. The tickle from the tears in my eyes reminded me, this is real. And I tried to focus on Han's face as he mouths to me in complete silence. Quiet. I put my hands over my mouth. Tears are now blurring my vision. The stars. He looked terrified. He looked desperate for me and wanted me to be as still as possible. Look at the stars. Focus on them. I did as he said and started to look above. I counted them as Trick's ear-splitting scream tore across the Havana. I tried so hard and desperately to keep my eyes fixated on the shapes in the sky. The sound of his screams turned into cries. The snapping of bones echoed and popped. The ripping of muscles and the blood-curdling chokes for air settled in every particle of my body. It's a sound I will never forget. There's a dog in the stars. My eyes trace the shape of its tail. I stared at it again until my head began to throb. It felt like hours had passed before the sound stopped, before the screams died down, and the sound of chomping and chewing dissipated. The heavy smell of cotton overpowers the stench of blood, that coppery smell. I don't even remember walking back to the jeep. I definitely don't remember the sun coming up, nor do I remember when the sound of the grass swaying came back to life, nor do I remember the ride back to our tent. I do, however, remember the very faint splash of blood that covered a tiny part of the ground, all that's left of him. I remembered hearing Hun reporting another lion attack to the locals. I remember the numbness that covers my body. I heard Trick's voice in my mind playing like a tape that can never stop. I never asked Han why he ruled us there knowing what could have happened, or why he didn't warn us. Part of me blames myself. Part of me blames him. I never asked him why the scent of cotton. Specifically, why was that covering our scent? My only guess is trial and error. I really try my best not to think of it, but every night I relive the terror in my head. I try and move on, but how can you? It still sends chills up my spine when people ask me, why don't I like looking up at the stars?
He looked exactly like he did then, but a bit taller. The soft face with small eyes and thin lips that always made him look younger than he actually was. Just a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow that made him look more grown up. Grinning, he dropped his duffel bag and opened his arms wide. "Richie, how are you, man?" Darren, his gritty voice so familiar, asked. I must have looked stoned, because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I squeaked out a hello, and I was quickly pulled into a hug. It's weird to think, but he even smelled the same as he did back then. Weed and pepperoni pizza. Darren being Darren, he rammed along about how long it's been, and how much I've changed. And I couldn't help but think, you died 4 years ago. Myself, Darren, and 2 friends would always go into nearby forests for camping trips, between the ages of about 12 and 15. They were just chances to get away from our parents, smoke weed, and eat a bunch of rubbish without our adults telling us off. None of us had much money, so our camping equipment was 2 kiddie tents, stolen from siblings or neighbour yards, and a box of matches that we would use to make our own fire pit. We weren't totally stupid. We knew not to stray from paths, and we never went much more than a mile into the forest. There was a 1 mile marker, and before that, whichever way you wandered, you would come out into a main road. Past that marker, it was thick, unforgiving woodlands that was almost impossible to find your way out of. Further than that was a disgusting swampland that stunk like rotten farts. Guess what we'd do? We'd be cocky and dare each other to walk into the woodlands. 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 30. The triumphant would come out swaggering that wasn't scary. Only idiots could get lost. You can probably guess, we are idiots. Due to a peculiar week of warm weather in mid-November, we decided it would be fun to go camping. Covered in winter coats and snow boots and thick thermo socks, we got into the 1 mile marker, and before setting up, one friend, Jimmy, said, "Let's go deeper. I heard rangers were going round and rounding people up. I'm not going home because of some forest security guard." Agreeing, we went past that 1 mile marker. I can't be sure, but I'd say we were 3 miles deep past the marker. The woodlands were incredibly crowded. We had to climb over a lot of huge ground-broken roots to finally find a flat clearing for our tents. It wasn't too scary, just darker than the other area. We set up, lit some blunts, and chowed down on a bunch of chips and 2 days old pizza. Nothing happened until late in the night. The tents were small, but we could fit 2 people in each. Jimmy and Marcus went in one, Darren and I in the other. We soon fell asleep, probably around 11 PM. My phone buzzed at about 1 AM, which woke me up as it was under my face, with a message from my dad, drunk texting to see if I'm alright. Delirious from sleep, I touch it and turn the harsh light screen on. Just before the light went off, I noticed a silhouette on the tent. I went off to see who it was properly, and with my brain still in night mode, I touched the phone to get light again. The silhouette didn't shift, but I saw it properly then. It crouched down. I guess it noticed the light coming through the tent, and I saw how long its legs were. Like 5 foot long sticks. Its arms were similar, swinging as it crouched. It pressed its long finger into the tent and made that horrid scraping noise. I kept as quiet as I could. If it was a ranger, they would have started banging on the tent and announcing themselves. I turned the light off again and turned to face Darren. Outside the tent came the sounds of leaves and sticks crush underfoot. The person was sneaking around, and the sound was so careful and quiet. They didn't want to be heard. I began to get those shakes you get when you're really cold and anxious. I tried to whisper to Darren to wake up. Pretty sure he had a pocket knife in his body somewhere. I thought it would come in handy with this freak checking out our tents. I whispered through my teeth, "Darren, wake up!" But the guy was a super heavy sleeper. I almost pissed myself when I heard the zipper of the tent begin to pull. The person was trying to open it, carefully though. They were trying hard to stay quiet. They were gently tugging the zip, but they wouldn't figure out which way it went. It went from top to bottom. Finally the zip comes down, and I kept my eyes closed tight, but I was shaking like a leaf. I opened my eyes a slit to see what was there. A hand, black and thin, crept in. Extremely slowly, this hand did not twitch, but hovered further into the tent, over the feet of Darren's sleeping bag. Before I could nudge Darren to wake him up, this hand clenched hold of Darren's ankle and pulled him out the tent. Darren instantly began screaming, and so did I. I tried to grab hold of Darren before he disappeared through the tent's opening. He was pulled out so fast. The tent rolled over, but I finally managed to get out to see Darren getting dragged into the woodlands beside the clearing. He was covering his face from the twigs and shrubs he was pulled into, screaming and crying to help him. Jimmy and Marcus's faces appeared from the tent with worried looks. I yelled at them that something had taken Darren, and they looked at one another with hesitant faces. They thought it was a joke. I grabbed my boots, forgetting my coat, and ran in the direction that Darren was dragged. Jumping over a small tree trunk, losing my balance, I got hit in the face with a branch. I panicked as a liquid sprayed on me from the leaves of the branch. It stunk of copper, but I just rubbed my face and continued in a straight line. I could hear Jimmy and Marcus following me, asking me to stop, and it wasn't funny. I sprinted as fast as I could, taking a beating from the branches and roots that got thicker and thicker as I went in. I was shouting Darren's name, and soon Jimmy and Marcus did the same, but we got no reply. 5 minutes of running through thick nature brought me to another clearing, bigger than our tents were, with a large tree in the centre. There was a little bit of moonlight to see the clearing, but nothing else was clear. Jimmy luckily grabbed his flashlight before he began following me. When he put the light on me, he and Marcus jumped, as the light showed the splashed blood all over me. My face, clothes, and everything was covered in splatters. That's what was on the branches. I began to cry as I rubbed the blood off me. Jimmy took the light off me, and with a worried look followed something on the ground. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Jimmy pointed to the ground. A trail of blood ran through the woodlands, through the clearing, and up a large tree in the centre. We all followed the light as Jimmy moved along the trail. It covered most of the bark and curled around the trunk. We peeked around the tree, and the blood stopped on the trunk. Marcus looked further around the trunk when a droplet of blood fell on his forehead, then another, and then another. He looked up and began screaming. Darren's body. His eyes still open but blank. He was slung over a thick branch. I told Jimmy to keep his light on, and I tried to get him down. I pulled his arm and his body came down, like a sack of bricks. I think we all knew he was gone there and then, but we just didn't want it to be true. Darren landed on his belly, and we saw that his back had been ripped to shreds. We all cried. There wasn't much we could do. After a long time sitting next to his body, the sun was beginning to rise. We didn't say much, but we agreed we'd have to get back to our tents and call someone. Our parents, the rangers, Darren's parents. I pet Darren's hair before I stood up. He was my best friend, and I had to leave him there. If I just shook him awake when the thing was outside the tent, he'd probably be alive. As we began to leave the clearing, the sound of squelching came from behind. We span around and saw that thing, holding Darren's body. It was tall, maybe 7 foot and thin, and all black. Its eyes were wide and sunken. I can't remember much else, as it quickly ran into the woodlands with Darren's body. Jimmy and Marcus had to restrain me from running after it. They basically dragged me, kicking and screaming, back to the tents. When we got there, 2 rangers were checking the tents out, and their faces switched from annoyed to shocked when they saw us, covered in blood and crying. Darren's body was never found. His parents were distraught. He had a younger brother, and that kid was never the same. Went from fun and bouncy to just there. He drifted day to day. 2 years after his death, Darren's family moved down south, and we never heard from them again. The rangers and police believed we didn't do anything, but they didn't believe our monster story. Most likely a wolf. Shock can make you think crazy things. It's not their fault, one officer said behind our backs. Jimmy, Marcus and I stayed friends, but basically ended contact when we finished high school. We never spoke about Darren again. But now, in the flesh, Darren was chatting away to me in the doorway of my dorm. I asked him into my room. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I thought we could get some privacy to talk. The way he spoke and acted, he was so comfortable around me, like the last time I saw him was yesterday. He sat down on the bed opposite mine and continued talking. I don't know what he was talking about, but I stopped him and took some time to come up with what I wanted to ask him. "Darren, how are you here?" I asked. "What do you mean?" he laughed. "I did good in high school, dumbass, just like you." I shook my head. "No, Darren. Do you remember 4 years ago?" Darren was smiling, but his eyes went blank. "Yeah, we were in freshman year." "Do you remember our camping trips?" I said. His smile faded as he looked around the room, as if trying to find an answer. "Yeah, smoke weed and eat junk." "Darren," I trailed off. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, dude, you died. You don't remember? Man, what fun times." "On one of those trips you were attacked, and your body was never found." Darren gave me a totally blank look and grinned. The grin was a genuinely happy smile. In a flash, the grin dropped and he looked sullen. "I moved away that summer. Never went on camping trips." He wouldn't look at me now. We sat in silence for some time before he stood up grabbing his bag. He was breathing really quickly, his chest going up and down fast. "Dude, are you alright?" "I have to go," Darren muttered, looking at his feet. I stood, but he quickly shuffled to the door and left. The door swung shut behind him, and by the time I opened it, I looked up and down the dorm halls. He was nowhere to be seen. People were still moving in the dorms. "Hey, did any of you see that guy that just left?" I asked a small crowd. A few stopped and shook their heads at me. I feel like I've gone crazy. I have no explanation for what just happened. I'll never forget the time that my friend and I decided to take an impulsive camping trip during the winter of 2006. Had my parents not been out of town that weekend, they would have never let me go, especially not with the friend I was going with. They had never liked Travis. Out of all the friends I ever had, Travis was the one they hated the most. They would always say that he was a bad influence, and they weren't entirely wrong. Thankfully, I was a smart kid, and saw through Travis's ball. As for his parents, they never really cared for what he did or where he went. That blew my mind. How awesome it would have been if my parents didn't care what I did. After the camping trip, I'm kind of glad they did though. Travis insisted that I be the one who brings the food, and he brought the gear. His basement was full of all kinds of stuff that his parents hoarded over the years, and so finding camping gear wasn't much of an issue. We bundled up and hiked through the woods right behind our school. This would have been around 9 at night. We walked for about half an hour until we found a neat little clearing of trees to set up. We pitched the tent, and after about 20 minutes of trying, we finally managed to get a small fire going. Keep in mind that this was in the middle of December in northern Canada, so the entire landscape was smothered in a blanket of undisturbed snow. We stayed up a while, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows. We talked about people we went to school with and local rumours. One of Travis's things was to tell stories. He loved it. Most of the time these stories were far-fetched and hard to believe, but the one he told me was about something I thought about a lot. Recently, a kid in our school had vanished on his way home from school. There were a few people who said that they saw him wandering next to the woods behind the school, which were conveniently the same woods we were camping in. I had forgotten about it until Travis had to remind me. It made me uneasy, being in the same place where a kid disappeared. He told me that the police think Elkman got him. Something that had the body of a man and an elk for a head. I immediately dismissed his ridiculous story, and we both laughed a little bit. As the night continued, we told jokes, gossiped, and laughed with the thought of that missing kid lingering in our minds. Eventually, we both decided we were too tired and we should probably get to sleep. I bundled up, climbed into the tent with Travis, and then we both drifted off to sleep. I awoke maybe an hour later to find Travis sitting up in the tent with his flashlight on, a look of terror on his face. It was the first time I've ever seen Travis genuinely scared. I asked him what was wrong. He told me he heard what sounded like a kid laughing next to the tent. I rolled my eyes and told him where to go, but then I heard it too. It was a giggle, maybe about 20 feet from my tent. I sat up in fear. Travis and I looked at each other and listened. We started to hear bushes rustling next to us, and that was it. We piled out of the tent and bolted through the woods towards home as fast as we could, leaving the camp behind. As we ran, I thought I heard a pair of footsteps running behind us, but I didn't dare look back. We eventually made it out of the woods within 20 minutes, but kept going on until we reached Travis's house. Terrified, we spent the rest of the night cowering in his bedroom with the light on. The next morning, we told Travis's parents what happened, and his dad came with us to the campsite. What we found in the camp was enough to make me want to cry. In the snow around the entire site were pairs of bare human footprints, resembling that of a child's. Travis's father tried to rationalise it, but we all know that no one lived out there, not for quite a distance. We also found snow in the tent, and our bags all emptied out onto the floor, which meant whoever chased us out the woods that night had gone back and rummaged through our stuff. There was nothing missing luckily, but it was still creepy. We packed up the camp and left as quickly as we could. I'm now graduated and living my life as an adult. Travis and I are still good friends, and he's doing well. While we're still friends, we don't talk about that night. The very thought that someone was lingering out in the middle of nowhere, listening and watching, it haunts me to this day. The missing kid was never found.
This happened to us 2 years ago. We, being myself, my daughter, and father, lived in a double shared house. This incident took place over a span of a month, so one day we decided to walk to the store as it's close to the house and a nice day. When we came back, we noticed somebody's tried to pry our locks off the doors. There were 2 obvious dents and blue marks and a whole big boot print on our doors, front and back. Someone wanted in bad. I have no idea why. We have nothing of major value living in the hood. We were gone for less than 20 minutes, so we're on edge. The person could still be around. Now after this, so many bizarre things were happening. I'm trying my best to explain this in a way that's easy to follow and keep it short. If I described each thing in my home, I'd be typing for days. I found things out of place where I know I didn't place them. I noticed locks on my old windows are broken. Dish liquid bottle is broken. This weird ass oily substance on random shit. On my curling iron in the bathroom. So, later on, I take the trash out of the dumpster in the alley. When I lift the lid, I see some types of handmade tools. Homemade. It's a short metal rod with a washcloth tied around the edge, with a blue doctor's type glove on the end. I realised this is what the person used on my door to try and pry the lock. God, what else have they done? I look in the trash. I look in my neighbour's dumpster too, just out of curiosity. What I found made my heart sink. In their trash bag was my belongings, the most random stuff. My title to my old car, which was in a duffel bag in my top closet. Clothes, makeup, household items. At this time, the man and woman who lived next to me start arguing loudly. She walks out and across to the street. He is standing in his doorway, giving me a death look. I was annoyed, but also in fear, coming to the realization that people have been in my home. I look up to him. I say, "I know you've been in here." His response, "I didn't steal a thing," with a smirk. A quick description. A shirtless, fat, redneck old white guy. I'm losing it. The words slip out of my mouth. "I'm going to burn your house down." Bloody hell. My mind is racing, thinking of all the things that are out of place. My dishwasher bottle was broken because it sits on the sink below a window. They break it coming through my window. They've been in here multiple times. Cut the chase. I called the cops. They came out, talk to my neighbours and leave. After they leave, the man is out by my back door on the phone with someone, smiling. Not 10 minutes later, about 5 cars pull up, full of people. A big truck pulls behind my truck and blocks it in. A white guy with a tank top on and gold chains around his neck gets out. He's got a gun. I shove a chair against my back door and see the people heading for it. I scream for my boyfriend, grab my daughter, and run as fast as I can out the front door. At this time, there's also people coming around the side of the home. I hear a big pop. They've shot. I almost fell off my porch. All I could do was yell, "Please no." And we're running down the street. I'm holding my daughter, who's laughing because she doesn't know what's happening. I know I'm about to get shot. I know I'm going to get gunned down on the street somehow. We make it to a corner and don't die. We called the police again. They searched and found no bullets. Took statements from my neighbours, and I asked them to stay for a moment while I went in the home to grab some clothes. And sure as hell, we're not staying there tonight. When I grab the clothes and diapers, I see an empty gallon of weed killer in my daughter's room. Now in the time it took us to run, wait on the cops and come back, they re-entered my home again, poured weed killer everywhere. Now I gathered up everything I could and left, but nothing ever come of this. No arrests. This time I went back to get the rest of my belongings. I have 0 questions to my answers, and I still have nightmares about this. Basically, me and my friend are on our way to an urbex location, smoking a fat blunt, when a car pulls up to us. 3 people in it ask us if we know any abandoned buildings in the area, so we tell them about the one we're thinking about going to, thinking nothing of it. We first go check out another location, but that turns out to have been taken down, so we move to our original target. Now, given some context, both me and my friend wear disturbing masks to keep our identity safe, warding off any potential attackers. We completely forget about the possibility of the other group being there. So me and my friend basically get to this abandoned hotel, start messing around. We're setting up a picture because now we like taking creepy pictures of each other, so he sits himself in a corner and I go behind the front desk wearing my mask. All of a sudden, we both see a beam of light as it hits my face, then hear 3 screams and 3 people bolting it out of there. Instead of being mature, me and my friend just quickly glance at each other and without thinking run after them. I'm pretty sure one of them was an Olympic sprinter, because I've never seen anyone run as fast as I did that night. This was all at 2 AM in an abandoned hotel that's about 3 miles away from the nearest road. That's so something I would do.
Hey guys, I'm an 18-year-old and I currently live in Egypt. I'm half Egyptian and I moved here 2 years ago, so I don't really know how to deal with people in here. By people I mean troublemakers. The place I live in is pretty decent and I go to school, so I never had to encounter any troublemakers. My dad travels a lot since I'm the oldest of my siblings. I do most of the shopping, so I get the groceries and almost everything from big malls. One day, my hour trip turned into a nightmare. I drive a good car, not a sports car or a supercar, but a pretty good car for an average youngster in the Middle East. About 3 weeks ago, I had a list of groceries to grab, so I went to the mall and did shopping, and paid for it and got out. I decided to try that new vegan burger that I see every day on Facebook, and got one. I got a soda, fries as well, and started walking to the parking lot. I see this kid who I thought was 15-ish. He looks pretty homeless to me, and I decided to give him my fries. So I dropped the bag from my back seat, and I was even thinking of talking to him, maybe to hear his story. I thought helping him would just be harmless, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. I got over to him to shake his hand, and asked him, "What you doing out here, man?" And he said he was on his way to the village, but lost his money. Now a lot of people out here warn me that this is a scam, but I felt really like he was in a bad situation, so I asked more. Where do you live? What do you do for a living? Are you in school? What are you doing in this city? He said that he's working with someone and he sells stuff on the street, and he sold goods, but he lost his money. I felt really bad for him, so I offered him a ride to the bus station, and enough money to get him where he wanted to go. Even though it wasn't much, it would be enough for a ticket and some change. I didn't feel anxious at all, to the point where I told him about my private life. Before I head out, the mall security comes and asks me if he's causing trouble, and I said, "Nah man, he's alright." It was disgusting for this guy to assume that this poor guy was a bad person, I thought in my head. We head out and I share my burger with him, and I even gave him the soda. He starts guiding me through the road. Everything was fine until he asked me to turn off to a dirt road. Now I don't really know where the bus station is, but I knew for sure it wasn't there, and I told him I'd just check it on my phone, and he said that's fine. But I was starting to question the story in my head. I was relieved that he didn't insist. He said, "Oh, it's not that far." Great, but still I was certain that a public bus station would be public, and he wouldn't be able to do anything, right? What made me really suspicious was a phone call he made. He called someone and he said, "Hey X, meet me at the one below the bridge, I got the goods." Now I was like, what's he on about? I don't see any goods. Before I arrive, I said sorry it's so dark, but you can walk there and I'll drop you off here. He said yeah, that's alright, and sighed. He called the guy again and told him he'll be out on the road, and that he's in a white SUV. I was so anxious at this point. We arrive, and Jesus Christ, what happened next was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. When we got there, I saw 7 guys who were obviously looking for me. Now it was a highway, so I thought switching to the last lane would allow... Wait, there's also a group of people on the other side. Now this is a highway, so I thought I could just switch lanes. But wait, there's also a group of people on the other side now. I even noticed that one of them has a stick, or something sharp on them. They start waving something at me. I got into the middle lane and gassed it out there. They were shouting and running after me. I look at him and say, if you don't want to drop you off here, I can only drop you at the police station, which was the only other way, and he told me just to drop him there. I said okay, but make it fast. He gets out and I get the hell out of there. I don't know what would have happened if they had caught me. They might have mugged me, or maybe it was something to do with drug dealing. Maybe they could have kidnapped me. I don't know what would have happened. Sorry for my bad English. As I said, I'm Egyptian.
I live in an apartment complex with my husband and 13-month-old baby in a bad area of my city. My husband was at work. He finishes around 11 most days, and I kept hearing strange noises from my nearby balcony. I turned the porch light on, expecting to see a stranger with a toothy grin and a knife in hand. Instead, I saw no one. Going back to what I was doing. Again, I heard a strange noise and nervously checked. Nobody, nothing. I thought to myself that it was just my neighbours outside, that I was probably just overreacting to them sliding the door shut or something, turning the light on, turning it on again, etc. So I come back inside, shove some headphones into my ear, and stop frightening myself. This worked beautifully, and I forgot all about the sound I heard. Typically, at 10, I take a bath and prepare my mind for slumber. I got caught up in something on the internet though, and ended up not getting up from my kitchen until before 10 PM. Around that time, I arose to the bath. I then hear a pounding sound outside my door. I glanced through the peephole and saw no one. I can only see the other apartment out of the peephole. However, since I'm nosy, I decide to wait until I can see this person. They're now pounding really hard. It's actually shaking my door. Now after about 8 minutes or so, the pounding stops. I wait. Still no one. The neighbours hadn't answered their door either. The silence continues for maybe 5 minutes or a couple of minutes after I walked away. It began again. This time, it sounded like it's on my door. Now I'm a very anxious person. I do not like being alone in my apartment at night, and I refuse to open the door if I absolutely don't have to at night. I cautiously look through the peephole and see nothing. This terrifies me. I message my husband and he told me to call our security. Now at this point, the pounding gets louder and louder. I'm absolutely terrified. This went on for some time. I stared out my door's peephole, wondering what's going on, as I try to rationalize what's happening. Maybe someone's actually knocking on my neighbour's door, and it just sounds like they're knocking on mine. Maybe someone's locked outside and pounding on the door. Then, my thoughts are disrupted as somebody begins to scratch on my door. Now my apartment door is metal, so I distinctly hear the sound of the person's nails running across it. I glance out the peephole, terrified at which creature I might discover, though again, no human in sight. I then thought that I should go to the closet in my bedroom to call security, away from the front door, but right as I was about to walk away, I saw something through the peephole that made me gasp. I saw a man slowly stand up. I've never seen him before. I couldn't see him prior to standing, because a peephole doesn't see that far downwards. I'm pretty sure that he was crouching down, waiting for me to open my door to see what the hell was happening and attack me. I'm so glad that I didn't. It was my senior year of high school. I finally made some good friends and used to clog up my parents' landline and just stand outside on the phone talking away. We had a ranch-style house with a fairly long driveway, and across the street from my home was one giant field. There was a mansion that a local doctor owned far back in the field. But more or less, if you stood on the driveway to my home looking across the street, there was nothing but empty fields as far as you could see. At the end of the driveway is our mailbox, of which stood next to the only street light on the block. So one night, I'm standing at the end of my driveway, talking on my phone to a friend, and my mother kept popping her head out the front door, complaining for me to get off the phone and come inside. It's late. I just told her 5 minutes multiple times and kept speaking. I then remembered complaining to my friend about her and how annoyed I was. Now at some point, I heard my name being called again. Only now, it's a loud whisper, like when you're quietly trying to get someone's attention. I distinctly remember saying to my friend, "Oh God, she's yelling at me again," and kept talking. A few moments later, I hear my name being called again. I ignore it, kept on talking. Again. A few moments later, also heard, "Come over here." I turn around and realise the front door isn't closed. I know, I thought it is odd, but not enough to register anything to change what I was doing. I continued talking for a while, then said goodbye and headed in. I get inside. My parents had just gotten in bed. I complained to my mom that she didn't have to keep yelling at me, that she should have just let me finish my call, etc. To which she responded she hadn't come outside in about an hour. Cut 2 hours later. It's around 2 AM. I was in my room watching Evil Dead, and I get up, headed to the kitchen to make ramen. My mom, who had heard me in the kitchen, yelled at me from the bedroom to make sure the front door's locked before I go to bed. I walk out of the kitchen, heading to the front door, making sure it's locked. The front door was one of those that had an oval of frosted glass in the center, so that you could look through it clearly in tiny sections. Others are frosted, so you can't. So anyway, I did what I normally do and looked through one of the tiny clear sections towards the street lamp at the end of the driveway. Kind of like when you go close to the blinds, you look outside every so often. However, I couldn't see the street lamp. Now for a split second, I thought maybe the lights went out until whomever was outside on the other side of the glass moves to the side. I sprinted out of there to my parents' room, waking my dad up, yelling at him what had happened. He got out of bed with my mum, grabs a bat, rushes outside but doesn't find anything. He turned on all the lights, nothing. Creeped out, I go back to bed. Next morning, I wake up and head to my car for school. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. I figured I just moronically left it open or something the night before and got in. So school ends. I got home to find a police car in my driveway. Apparently someone's broke into our garage overnight and stole all my dad's tools and everything else. Not only that, he's robbed several other homes and assaulted people. It was scary to realize whoever it was literally hiding around my home, baiting me while I was on the phone, and then hours later was still outside there staring in through the front door.
This happened around 10 years ago, in 2008 or 2009. I was visiting my grandmother in a rural section of the Lake of Ozarks, near a small town with a hilarious name where I went to high school. I was very familiar with the area, and when visiting my grandmother, I would often walk into town, taking backward trails until I reached the main road going into town. Very rarely, someone would stop and offer a ride, and normally I would accept. It's a small town in a rural area, where everyone mostly knows everyone else. So I wouldn't even look up until I was getting in the vehicle. I stopped accepting rides after this. I had just come out of the woods and was walking along the side of the road. I was maybe a mile or two out of the town and enjoying my walk. An older blue Ford Taurus pulls up next to me. The driver rolls down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" and starts to walk over. I get in and get a good look at my driver. The man looked like a greasier version of Charles Manson. Flat, stringy brown hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in a week, and it came down to his jawline. He had salt and pepper 5 o'clock shadow and piercings, wild blue eyes. Something about him rang every alarm bell in my body, and I went to get back out of the car, but we were already in motion. Instead, I begin to look around the vehicle. The front is relatively normal and even clean. The back seat is covered with a blanket. On top of the blanket is something that takes up nearly the entire back seat, wrapped in a tarp. Whatever it is stands about 5.5 foot off the back seat. On top of all this is a big, black, shaggy dog that is staring right through me. The question snapped me back to the front seat. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked. He's staring at me instead of the road. "What are you doing here?" "Oh," I say, laughing a little out of nervousness. "I'm visiting my grandmother. I live in a college town about 90 miles from here, and I'm on my way to see some old friends." He frowns. "No," he says flatly. "Why are you here?" I frown a little. Everything inside me is flashing, "Get out, get out, get out, get out now." I just told you," I mumble. My tension is rising visibly. The dog gives a low growl from the back seat. We are passing the sign for a country line. There is a gas station coming up that marks the beginning of the town. He's still staring at me. "Why are you here? Why on earth are you here?" He screams out of nowhere, slamming his hands on the steering wheel. I'm huddled against the door, shaking. He pulls into the gas station. "Give me your glasses." Statement, no question. No emotion. Without question I hand them over. "Wait here." He goes into the store. I'm frozen in place, shaking and trying to will my arms or legs to work, trying to start breathing again. I know whatever the hell is going on, I need out, fast. The dog gave another low growl, and that snapped me into action. I get up, almost rolling out the car. Shakily I walk into the store, and in an equally shaky voice say to the guy, "This is close enough to where I'm going. I would like my glasses now, please." My eyesight is very poor, but I feel the intensity of the glare he gave me. I think the cashier could too, because she took a couple of steps back, close to the store phone. Silently he hands me the glasses, continues to stare daggers at me as I put them on, and walks out the store without saying another word to either of us. The cashier stares at me, clearly freaked out. "What was that?" she asks. The adrenaline of the situation has started to wear off, and the real gravity started to sink in for me. Tears are beginning to silently course down my face. "Can I use your phone, please?" I ask her. She nods and wordlessly hands it to me with a box of tissues. She tells me I can go into the manager's office to make my phone call, and take as much time as I want. I thank her, go back, and let my friends know what just happened. I also tell them I'll be cutting through the woods to get them, because I don't want to see this guy ever again, and that I'll be coming out behind the house. I took a few minutes to breathe and relax after I hung up. When I went back out, the cashier asked if I was okay, and if there was anything she could do for me. I thanked her and again told her no. I asked if she knew the guy. She had never seen him before, and she didn't think he's from the area. That shook me even more. I give her my friend's phone number and ask her to call them if he comes back. I left and cut through the woods to my friend's house. We had a great afternoon, and when I was ready to leave, they gave me a ride home. At the time, it didn't bother me as much, but the longer I've had to think about it, the more curious I am about the back seat. That dog wasn't moving much from the top of it, unless the guy told him to. I try not to think about what was under that tarp too much. It looked like someone lying in a fetal position from behind. And just for a side note, I am a 6'1" male that was about 210 pounds at the time. I wore my head down to my waist with a full beard. I myself was a little intimidating, and would occasionally accidentally scare people just from my appearance. The aura this man gave off was terrifying, and there was no question he could have overpowered me.
So back in the late 80s, the company I worked for was running security cables in the old tariff building down by the Wall Street wall statue. I was with my foreman at the end of the day, and he wanted me to show him what we did to the building. So we go down there, and the stairwell door opens into a T corridor, say going left or right. Our job was directly to the left, so we turn and go this way. I stop with him because we see a guy at the other end of the corridor about 200 feet away. All we could see was a guy wearing a blue jumpsuit like mechanist wear and a blue hard hat. We're curious as to why somebody's went down there, especially at this time. So I show him what we did on the left side, and we go back. Now there's no sign of the guy. We were right by the stairway door. So we go down the corridor to where the guy was standing. It's a dead end. Where the hell could he have went? Why was he here this late at night? He was so silent too. We go upstairs where the security guards are. I mean, we're freaking out a bit at this point. We say, "Is there anyone else working in the building?" The guard goes, "No, why?" My foreman says, "We just saw someone down in the basement," and before he could say another word, the guard goes, "In a blue hard hat?" We both look at each other. The guard opens up a drawer, a big filing cabinet drawer full of these old pictures and these old workers. He tells us to write down what we saw. I ask him what it is. He says, "That guy has been sighted since the 1940s. Penhurst in Spring City, PA, around June of 2013, if I remember correctly. There's a series of tunnels and subtunnels that connect all the buildings together underground. We're both standing in the tunnel entrance, which used to be a cafeteria called Dietary now. So the basement to the building had double doors. One of them was bolted shut, other wide open. The basement was lit from foundation windows to near daylight. The three of us are facing each other in a sort of triangle talking 3 feet to the left of the store. Now, besides our headlamps, the only light is from the room, and the tunnels are total darkness. Out of the corner of my eye, the next room appears to go dark. It's so sudden, I go silent. Now, what was the scariest part of this was that I quickly realized that they also went silent. I turn my head. There's a black silhouette vaguely resembling a person in the doorway, except they're much larger and more distorted than any normal human would ever be. Almost incomparable, taking up the entire doorway. As I sit here and look at whatever this thing is, my headlamp goes completely absorbed by it. I can see the daylight through the basement behind it now, as I turn my head to say what the hell. My friends had already started running, as they also saw it. The one had a direct view of it, just said it kind of materialized in the doorway. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. The energy in the moment just seemed to completely leave me, and my legs felt rubbery. I looked right at this thing just feet above me. My light did nothing. I was always so skeptical of such things prior to this. I've been up and down the East Coast, across the country, my friends too, but I've never experienced anything even close to this. God knows what happened that day. I'll just give you a bit of background. I'm female and drive for Lyft at night. I'm on the shorter side, about 5'4", and have been driving for nearly 6 months. I tend to drive downtown Denver, especially on weekends where there's most money to make. In this time, I've only had a couple of truly scary encounters, and I drive 7 nights a week, at least a couple of hours a night. The first scary one started out normal enough for the late night ride that I was doing. I just dropped off a passenger in Aurora and was making my way back towards Market Street since the bars hadn't closed yet. I get a pickup. It's on the way. It's a nice area that I don't feel uncomfortable in, but everyone knows Aurora CO knows it's really not the best area, even with a few nicer places there. A couple of guys hop in, one in the front, one in the back. Now they have hoodies and are carrying backpacks, but it's Colorado and it's almost 2 in the morning, so not too odd. It gets odd after they first get in. I give my normal greeting, but they completely ignore me, shoving their backpacks onto the floor, pulling their hoodies up, shielding their faces from the windows with their hands. I instantly get uncomfortable and feel something's off. It was only a 10-minute drive, and we're in a secluded area, so I decided that the safest thing I can do is complete the ride. I can feel my fight or flight kicking in. Within about a minute, I had decided if they were trying anything on, I was gonna crash my car. Neither one had put on a seatbelt, so I figured that's the best chance I have. Once they arrive at location, they wanted to be dropped off, but I could tell it's not a good area. Bars with all the windows smashed, cars in disrepair and whatnot. They get out, but don't shut my doors. beginning to whisper to each other or glancing at me. One of them has his hand in his pocket, fidgeting with something. At this point, I've had enough and step on the gas, driving with the doors open. I drove for a couple of miles until I get to a gas station with lights and people before I stop to properly close both doors. I call it a night and headed home to cuddle my toddler and husband before having a good cry in the safety of my own bed. I have no idea what they're planning to do, but I know I was terrified from the moment they pulled their hoods up and the moment I drove off with my doors open. The second story takes place a couple of weeks after the first. I had sworn off all pickups in Aurora and the shady parts at night. I would still drop people off there, but I'd also turn off my app and leave the area when I was done. I was downtown as usual for a Saturday night. Bars were closing. I get a shared ride, which can be very good at bar closing. Now the thing to know about shared rides is that you can't request more than 2 seats, leaving room for 2 more people. Now I have, on multiple occasions, had a car with these types of rides, full of people. I get to the person and unlock my doors as normal and get 3 people in. Okay, small problem. I'm polite and say I can't give them a ride with 3 people, so they'll have to order a different lift. This is when the one guy turns. I don't want to pay more, he says. I say I'm sorry, but either one of you has to get out, or all of you do, and you need to order a different ride. This is a shared ride and means I could get 2 more passengers and they need the seats. With shared rides, you're only allowed to book 2 seats for 2 passengers. The guy says I'm not paying more, so you can just ignore other rides and take us home. At this point, he become aggressive and was putting his finger in my face. Now maybe I should have been more scared. But this is only Market Street at a bar close and it's packed. There's drunk people everywhere, and where there's drunk people, there's cops. I roll my window down as he continues to tell me where I'm gonna drive and what I'm gonna do, and threatening to hurt me. He's saying that he's really gonna put me in pain if I don't stop right now. I didn't catch the whole sentence, but I made eye contact with a cop and just focused on getting his attention. Me, okay, you got a new choice. You can all get out, or the cop can make you do it. The cop is now making his way over after seeing something's wrong. They all jump out, and the guy's flipping me off, and they disappear running. The cop says, "Am I okay?" asking for a short rundown of what happened. He then heads off to try and find them. I report both of them. I now carry a foam pepper spray in my defense, and I also have a dash cam, but I know if stuff gets real, that's probably not ever gonna protect me fully.
This was about 3 years ago, on a dark stretch of road near a main intersection in a major Bay Area city. I worked at a big name, healthy grocery store from 2014 to 2017. I was lucky to meet and work with amazing co-workers, some of whom have become my best friends and closest friends. One of my best friends, at the time and to this day, Cav, is one of the nicest, most caring people I've ever met. He is incredibly generous, genuine, and warm and welcoming to everyone, sometimes to a fault. At the time of this story, I'm a woman in my early 20s, and Cav is a guy in his late 20s. Cav and I have a weekly ritual of driving around the city after work and talking, sometimes about our problems, sometimes about what was going well, but it was therapeutic and always something to look forward to. One particular night, we invited our buddy Ben to join us. His department always got out 30 to 45 minutes after the rest of the store, so Cav and I would always take a short drive around the area to pass the time until Ben was off. Cav was driving that night. We did our drive and headed back to the store to pick up Ben. I order and get back to the store. We need to make a U-turn at a 4-way intersection. To get to the intersection, we have to go down a dark but short stretch of road. There are no streetlights for some reason. The intersection is well lit, always busy, and has shopping centre plazas on each side. From the dark stretch of road, it is exactly 302 feet, according to Google Maps, to the main, well lit and ever busy intersection. We're driving down a dark section. Cav suddenly interrupts what I was saying and says, "Oh my god, did you see that person waving?" He slows down the car to take a look. "No, what are you talking about? You didn't see them. There was someone in a black hoodie waving us down." I'm looking back. I have very poor eyesight, and it's dark. No, I don't see anyone. There's no one there. As I'm saying this, Cav is pulling into the empty parking lot parallel to the dark stretch of road. He reaches to the back seat and is moving jackets and other stuff off the back seat, obviously making room for this person. "No, Cav," I said. "No one's getting in this car, do you understand?" "But what if they need—" "No! There's no one there, and if there were, they'd have to walk up the intersection. No." He agrees, but insists we continue to circle around and check. I reluctantly agree, but realise I have no choice. We circle back, and sure enough, there's a girl, my age in her early 20s, standing alone, wearing all black. She has a hoodie on. She looks like she's sort of crying, maybe. Cav rolls down the passenger window, my window, down halfway, to which I roll it up another quarter of the way, and he asks her if she's okay. She seems off, and I immediately have awful vibes from her. "Four guys stole my purse," she says with her hands on her face. "It had my wallet. I literally lost everything, and I don't have a phone." The weirdest thing about this is that she wasn't crying. She was stretching her words out and whining, but she wasn't crying. I said, "Alright, we'll call the police for you. Why don't you walk up to the well-lit plaza and we'll walk up with you to the police?" "No," she said adamantly. "It won't help. I already called the police an hour ago." This is when I started to freak out. She just said she didn't have a phone. She's been standing in the dark for an hour. "I thought you didn't have a phone," I said. I do, it's dead." All of this is happening rapid fire, and before I can really mentally get into what's going on, Kaz tells her to get in the car, so we can help her. I say, "Walk up to the plaza at the intersection and we'll help you." Cav unlocks the door and says, "Nah, don't worry, we'll drive you there." The girl has her hands in her front pockets of her hoodie and gets in the car. I'm fuming. This girl was acting super weird. I remember at this point that I had my box cutter on me. I reached down into my backpack and am rummaging through the crap to find it. Cav is talking to her, but everything she says is contradictory. She says that she isn't from the area and has no idea where she is, yet she tells us that she grew up and lives 6 blocks away. As we're driving, she says she wants to go to a particular bar, that she could really use a drink. "I thought you didn't have your wallet or ID," I ask. I keep looking for my box cutter and I'm looking back at her. She has a waxy complexion and looks into my eyes as if she's looking through me. It gives me the creeps. Cav is incredibly kind to her, he's being an idiot, and keeps saying positive things, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. While this is happening, I find my box cutter, I open it all the way and hold it on my lap. I turn back and keep my eyes on her. She tells us that she has a boyfriend nearby and asks us to take her there. She and Cav continue to talk, and she says she was kicked out of her parents' house. Her hands still remain in her pocket, and mine remains holding the box cutter. Because of this whole ordeal, we've totally forgotten about Ben. Still watching her, I pull my phone out and call him. I'm explaining to Ben what's happening, and in a matter of seconds, she went from asking us for money and alcohol to saying weird stuff and wanting to get out of the car. We did not drop her at her boyfriend's house, but a few streets away apparently, in a random neighbourhood. We drop her off and there's silence for a few seconds in the car. "Oh my god," Cab says laughing. "She could have robbed or killed us." "Yeah, you idiot." I'm 100% certain of that, and at the very least, she was planning to rob us. Looking back, there was so much I could have done differently, like calling the cops right away. We're lucky that nothing happened, but I'm positive that there was evil in the car that night.
I ain't scared of nothing. That's what I yelled to my brother as I slammed the door to my car shut. Things have, changed since then. I've changed. I remember his smirk, how he held out my jacket, the way he spouted off on an endless list of things I should be scared of. Skinwalkers, werewolves, oh my. He resented each one as a reason after reason as to why this is a stupid idea, saying, I still have time to back out. I roll my eyes, snatching my jacket from his grasp, slipping into my car and yelling that I'm not scared before speeding away towards the darkening outline of the mountains. They stood out stark against the setting sun like teeth. Boy, how I wish I listened. I was wrong. I'm scared. Let me back up a little. It all started 2 days ago. I was out of my mind depressed. Could barely get out of bed. Thought about killing myself. Just dying all the time. Enough's enough. One of the few friends I have suggested solo camping. Said it might clear my mind. The wilderness, the silence, the solitude would probably be good for me. He gave me a list of spots, some more isolated than others. I decide upon the most isolated one, which is about a 3-hour hike from the last campsite, far out in the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I remember his face, surprising acceptance. You sure? I nodded, saying nothing. Okay, I mean it's a pretty secluded place, especially for a first-time camper. He shrugged. But then again, it's a beautiful one. You'll definitely get some perspective there. And the night sky out there is insane. I thank him and turned to leave, but he spoke again. Don't let the forest spook you, okay? A word of advice from a veteran. Don't go out at night no matter what you hear. You might never be heard from again. Could be a bear or lion. Now the drive up the mountains was strangely soothing. The gently curving roads that wove their way through the trees, up the rocks were exciting to navigate. And soon, my mind was eased into a peaceful state. I've decided to forego electronics for this, even going as far as securing my phone in the glove box. I needed to be away from all of that, able to focus on now, rather than ruminate about past or future. I would have been gone for 5 days and 4 nights. Enough time for me to hopefully recuperate and reassess my life and what I'm doing with it. I soon descended into Est Park, driving through the picturesque town towards RMMP, willing myself not to stay at the Stanley instead. I find the entrance to the park with ease, continue to the closest lot to my campsite. Night is falling. I silently curse myself for being so late. I sat in my car for a good 30 minutes before deciding that it would be too risky hiking 3 hours in near pitch black darkness. There were 4 other tents set up in the lot I was at, with room for one more, and as soon as I set up my tent, the night passed comfortably. I was surrounded by chatting, laughing people, happy children who ran around screaming. A few of them offered me roasted hot dogs and whatnot, and beer. I filled my belly smiling. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag before the last night fades from the dying embers. The second night didn't go so smoothly. I woke up late, well rested, but still groggy. Took my time repacking my tent. I hesitated at first, wondering if I should just stay there, but at 3 PM, another family showed up with proof that they had reserved the site. So I gather up, setting off. Immediately I got lost. Navigating by only map and compass for the first time alone is much harder than it sounds. And the trees, they can be misleading, can turn you around, make you think you're on the right path when you're actually miles away from where you should be. Instead of me taking 3 hours to go to the site, it took me nearly twice that time, and I was swiftly losing what little light was left in the day. Now finally, I found the site, but before I breathed a sigh of relief, I slowly set up my tent, building a small fire in front. It was now dark. I was jumpy. Every sound I heard was seemingly magnified. Every shadow cast by the dim light of the fire, a menace. Spooked, I crawled into the tent, curling up into my bag, trying to will myself into sleep. After a while, I was dozing, about to drift off, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. My eyes now shot open, and I reached for my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited. I heard the sound again. Someone or something was definitely walking around my tent, and it sounded like they, whatever they was, were trying to be quiet stealthily. Now this went on for hours in inconsistent bursts until I finally decided it was an animal, scavenging for the scraps or inspecting my tent. By dawn, I was dozing again, and the noise had finally stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or two, giving myself time to rest up. I woke up disorientated, exhausted, and started to panic before remembering I was out camping, that I needed to start hiking back now. But when I exited the tent, I saw that the sun was already setting. To say I was upset would be an understatement. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, see how far I could go out there. But deep down, I knew I'd instantly get lost and end up in a much worse situation. So I began collecting as much wood as I could to build a massive fire, preparing to hunker down for the night. The light from the sun seemed to disappear unfathomably fast. The third night was pretty problematic. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down waiting. I'd left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted. I know this isn't the best thing to do for camping, but I was improvising and utterly terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, prophetic even, a tiny candle in a sea of shadows. For hours I sat there, listening, afraid. I finally realized that I'm being ridiculous, that what I heard the night before was nothing to fear, that my subconscious, my monkey mind was playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for nothing. So I now bundled up and laid down, and I heard it, softly at first, a footstep, then 2, 3, growing louder and bolder. I sat up and felt the size of my eyes increase. What was that? I had to know. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was operating purely out of fear. I heard the noise. It sounded like something was running constantly around my tent. Suddenly, the side of my tent pushed in, as though someone was slapping it from the outside. "Hey!" I yelled, scared out of my wits. "Hey, I'm here. What are you doing?" I tried to stand, tripping myself up in the sleeping bag in the process, slamming down, scrambling up, swiftly unzipping the flap, running outside with a red-tinted flashlight. I saw a shape scurry away and followed, and there, standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their backs towards me. Their arms were hanging in a strange position by their side, their head pointed away from me. I now took a step back. A branch cracks underneath me, seeming to startle them. "Hey," I said again. "What the hell, man?" And it boiled up. A sound turned into a scream. It was laughter. It echoed around me, rattling my skull. I ran, leaping into my tent, zipping it up behind me, curling into my sleeping bag, crying. And the world around me exploded, or rather imploded. The walls of the tent shook like hundreds of hands were slapping it, poking it or punching it. Outside, it sounded like dozens of people running around, shattering the silence. I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I think I fainted. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings. I sat up and ran outside, looking around for proof of what I heard, but there was nothing. No footprints or handprints or anything disturbing at all. God, this is bad, I muttered to myself, throwing my things chaotically into my bag. I would leave today, in the dark. I could not stay for another night. I was just starting to unpole the tent when I heard it. A sound in the distance, perhaps carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me. Help me. Oh God, please help me. I reacted more out of instinct than logic and began running towards the sound before realizing that in no way was I in a place to help whoever was screaming. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, following the voice for about 30 minutes. "Where are ye?" I yelled while looking around me through the maze of trees. "I'm here, where are ye?" Quickly, The screams transcended into a deep, unsettling laughter. Scared out of my mind, I ran and turned back the way I came. By some miracle, I made it back to the site, grabbed my pack, putting all of the poles of the tent away, thinking I should roll it up and carry it instead of neatly folding it. Now around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, like I'm about to be swallowed. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, but it was only on the third pole out of 6 that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. Confused, I peered to the tent, and in terror, I screamed. Something was inside, but not just anyone. It was me, sitting there, bone thin, a terrifying grin on my face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each of my eyes. Instead of having blue irises, they're totally black. I jumped back, tripping over my own feet. Laughter rose around me as I scrambled up. I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent, followed swiftly by the other, then my head. My face that was not my face looked up at me, smiling, laughing. I screamed. I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the correct way. I couldn't even use the sun anymore for guidance since it's fully set. I ran without looking where I was going. I could feel the trees scratching up on me, pushing against me like they're holding me back for things that are yet to come. Suddenly, a light flashes in my face, and I run into something solid, something black, something that wraps around me. Immediately, I cowered, hiding my face in my hands. Oh God. Oh no, please go away. Hey, calm down, it's okay. You just scared me, what's wrong? I look up and into the worried blue eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact. He was holding me up. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, creating shadows now behind us. I look back in fear of what I might see, but there's nothing but trees swinging, slowly in the slight breeze. Hey, he said again, was that you screaming? I could not speak. I was terrified. Were you out here camping alone? I nodded and began crying. Hey, it's okay. Everyone can get spooked out here. Come on, my car's right over there, he said. I wiped my nose and blinked, finally saying, who are you? He glanced at me, saying, I'm a park ranger. But he didn't look like one. He was wearing a smooth black suit, black tie, white shirt, and his shoes are polished in leather, not hiking boots. Come on, he said again, taking my pack and swinging it onto his back. As he did so, his jacket slightly lifted up and I saw a psych handgun strapped to his belt. Okay, I said, looking back behind me. How did you find me? He now shrugged and said, good hearing. We entered the small clearing and saw a matte black SUV with tinted windows, headlights flaring, engine in idle, parked in the middle of it. He popped the trunk, threw my bag in. I climbed to the passenger side seat. He climbed into the driver's seat saying where do I need to be taken. I told him the lot number and we're on our way. After a few moments, he flipped the cubby in between us and pulls out a bag. "Corn nuts?" he said, holding the bag up to me. I took it gratefully and began chomping away. "So you're a ranger?" He looked at me, then back to the road. I stare at him transfixed. He looked exhausted. His wood-coloured hair almost seemed like he'd been out here for too long. The SUV jerked to a sudden stop, and he let out a slow, low breath. His eyes narrowed and looks at me, then back at the dirt trail in front. I follow his gaze, feeling fear returning once again inside me. And there, in the middle of the road, was me. The me that was not me. Its limbs hung loosely as though they're broken, and a sickly smile appears on his face. It waved. The man looked back at me, then back at the thing that was not me, then at me. I met his gaze. "I do not get paid enough for this," he muttered, before slamming on the accelerator towards the thing. We both felt the impact. The car bounced over the body, and he kept on driving. But around us, in between the cars, in the darkness, laughter bubbles up. A maniacal and persistent laughter. We reached the lot in silence, bathed in the first light of the sun. The man beside me seemed to be in deep thought, distracted. I was still scared, but hopeful that whatever that thing was is now dead, crushed. The SUV comes to a slow stop, and the man pops a trunk and hops out. He now walks to the back and grabs my pack as I jumped out, handing it to me. I then take it, thanking him for everything. "No problem," he said, "all in a day or night's work." And his lips quiver as though he's about to smile. I turned to leave, but he spoke up again. "Hey, if you ever want to talk about what you saw, just call me." He gave me a card. I took it and looked down. It was matte black and only had a single number written on it. There's no area code. I began, but I heard the door slam and look up. He's already back in his car, waving and speeding away, back towards where he come from, towards that thing. I shoved the card in my pocket, climbing my card, breathing a sigh of relief. Now, I still haven't told anyone about what happened, even when they asked me why I refused to go camping again. Now every so often, I pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone, wondering if I should ever call, wondering who the man was, and if he'd really be able to explain or make sense of any of this to me. Alright, now this is a story I have not told in a long time. It happened to me October, 6 years ago. I've told 4 or 5 people since then. No one believed me. I decided to stop talking about it when someone filed an anonymous tip to the school psychologist. That was 4 years ago. I've had a lot of time to think about it since then, and I think I'm finally ready to post my story. It's about one weekend I spent in the Ochita National Forest. I'd been planning the trip for weeks. Made sure I had the weekend off work. I didn't make any plans. All of that stuff. I started buying supplies a week before I went. I was gonna go camping in the forest near my town. I've been camping before, when I was a little kid with my parents, but never as an adult, never by myself, and never in this forest. I was so excited. Now, I'm not an idiot. I took all the necessary precautions. I told a few of my friends where I was going, when I was gonna be there, and when I'm back. I told them that if I go missing, call the cops. I bought an extra phone battery, enough food and water to last a week. Heck, I even brought my 9mm that my dad gave me when I turned 18. Never shot a thing, but I figured it would at least scare off whatever the hell was gonna mess with me. Now I'm telling all of you this so you know that I'm not some dumb kid who decided he wanted to take a trip to the forest one day and just get scared because he saw a bear or something. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. I was prepared. Just not, well, for this. Alright, enough backstory. I'll get on with it. I left around 6 in the morning. It's an hour drive from my place, so I was expecting to get there around 7. Ended up getting there at 7:30. I didn't mind. It was a lovely day. Not a cloud in the sky. Great weather. So I was pretty content upon my arrival. I parked my car a ways from the forest in a little clearing off to the side of the road where I knew I'd find it. I gathered my things, have a snack, and headed off towards the forest. The next few hours are kind of boring, so I'll pass over them. All you need to know is that I made my way well into the forest, set up a camp, and started enjoying myself. Cooked myself lunch on the crummy campfire I made around noon. I watched a few birds dancing at each other. I even took a picture of some deers I saw with my phone. Couldn't get a good shot though, but at least it's proof I was there. Now something seemed off. You see, forests are normally kinda loud. Not like a city loud, but there's a constant background noise that's always going on. Rustling in bushes and leaves, birds chirping, animals prancing around. Now when I first get into the forest, this is all well and good, but the later it got, the sounds just started to go away. Not all at once. It took the better part of the day for me to notice, but the sounds slowly dissipated. Birds stopped chirping, bushes stopped rustling. I stopped seeing animals too. That's what made me notice. At first, around 4 in the afternoon, I realized that I hadn't seen a bird in a while. That unsettled me, truth be told, but I stilled myself and kept on enjoying the stay. I was feeling lonely. I mean, this was really with the quiet and everything. So I called up a friend and chatted with him till sundown. After that, I realised it's getting so late that I hung up, ate food, put out the fire, and after a final assessment of my surroundings, a look at the wondrous night sky, I crawled into my tent to sleep. I kept the 9mm right next to me, just in case, you know. Now, sleeping on the ground in the middle of a forest isn't that easy if you are not used to it, considering I hadn't done it since I was a child. I was having a little trouble. It was probably 2 hours after I lied down. I started hearing something in nature again. Now, if I had heard bushes rustling a few hours earlier, this would have been cause for a celebration. But anyone would have got creeped out if it's the only thing they'd hear all night. So, I did what any rational human would have done. Clung onto my 9mm like my life depended on it. There was silence for a few minutes. The only thing I could hear was my own shaky breath. Then, the rhythmic sound of footsteps. 4 footsteps in a quick succession. No crunching of leaves or snapping of twigs. Just a steady beat. And it continues. It was getting louder. Close to my tent. Now I tried to peer through the fabric that separated me from nature, but I can't make out even a silhouette. I clutched a rifle harder, scared as any person would be. I remembered being sure that I would be safe though. Even bears will rarely attack camps unprovoked. But that natural human fear, that was overbearing, really making my mind begin to wander, and my hands shake. It stopped now, close to my tent, just outside of it. I could feel its presence near me. It was totally silent. I know it could have been a bear. It would be sniffing the tent right now if it were though. I knew it wasn't. I doubted it as a deer. They don't come out at night. Perhaps a wolf. They normally travel in packs. Even if it were a lone wolf, it wouldn't be a threat until I heard growling. But I hear nothing, just silence. And then, it screeched. That's how I knew it was something that I'd never seen before. Nothing makes that kind of sound. It was like a sort of cross between a bird and a human, like the stuff you see in horror movies that possess people with their heads backwards make. That's when I let the fear take over. I fired the gun in its direction. Oh dear God, what a mistake. It screeched again and scratched at the tent, tearing through the fabric, leaving a huge gash in the side. That was my first look at it, if you could call it a look. I barely saw a silhouette through the hole in my tent, but I did see its long arms shredding the side of my tent. It was trying to get me. I fired the rifle again. I must have missed because it didn't even flinch. That was when the flight reflex took over. Now, I only wanted to run. I turned around and fiddled with the opening of the tent, trying to keep my eye on the beast attacking me, but also trying to secure my escape as fast as I possibly could. I did it. I dove out of the tent, breaking into a full sprint. Behind me, I hear the thing still tearing into my tent. I thought maybe it mistook its enemy or prey for the tent and not me. The relief did not last long. I wasn't far away from the tent when I heard its rhythmic prancing again. It was faster than me, gaining. If I tried to outrun it, I would get caught. Just then, it was either a moment of survivalist brilliance or suicidal stupidity. I stopped and drove back into a thick bush near me. I remembered so many predators in the forest rely on seeing movement more than anything. If I could stay still, it may not see me. The best decision of my life. It ran past me, stopping in the same place where I stopped. I didn't notice before I hid, but the spot just under an opening in the trees. A pillar of light penetrated the oppressive darkness in the moonlight. I can see my assailant now. It was pale, made even more so by the white of the moonlight, and that it's hairless. Thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. I wanted to say it looked almost human, but comparing it to the type is wrong. Its back is hunched over, making it look bigger than any human. It stands on all fours in a way that no person could. Its long legs are bent in a weird, grotesque fashion that resembled a frog ready to leap. It circled around silently searching for me. I thought it was about to give up, but it threw its horrendous back upwards, straightened its legs, like a person. A horrific person. And then it looked at me. I saw it. I know it saw me. Nothing looks at you without seeing you. Not in the way this did, at least. I clutched the rifle close to my chest, terrified to use it or move. I now closed my eyes, awaiting the end. I opened my eyes again for 1 second. It's gone. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I fell asleep in the bush, cuddling my rifle, until finally being awoken by the sound of birds. Birds, thank God, birds. It was already daylight the next morning. I slowly stood up, waving my rifle to support me. I stumbled back to the camp to find my things mostly as I left them. My tent was unsalvageable, but I retrieved my backpack. Now for the entire trek back, I didn't stop looking around for that thing. I didn't let the gun leave my hands either. It wasn't until I got back that I finally relaxed. This was 6 years ago. I haven't went camping since, nor will I. Two days ago, I packed for my first camping trip. Even though I've been a little nervous, I'm also excited. Camping is very interesting because I know a lot of you won't consider staying in a cabin in the woods camping. I get that. But I'm a city girl. I was born in one of the largest cities in the world and lived there my entire life. The most time I spent amongst nature has been picnicking in Central Park. So to me, spending 10 days in a secluded cabin in the middle of the woods is basically camping. Ryder, on the other hand, my boyfriend, has been camping his entire life. We met 2 years ago when he first moved to the city from Pine Barrens in New Jersey. He grew up in the middle of the woods, so for him, city life was the big adjustment. On our first date, He told me all about life as a pioneer. I was taken by his adventurous nature and self-assuredness. He first moved to the city for a construction job. He misses the woods though, and its quietness. So I've already agreed to camp in, so I can experience this part of his life that he loves and cherishes. I really love Ryder, and want to be able to love this part of his lifestyle. But I have to confess that so far, things haven't been comfortable. I don't mean the bugs, or the creaky old mattresses. There's just some aspects of this whole camping thing that are seriously unnerving me. To start, the cabin he rented is really, seriously remote. We're somewhere in the Catskills. To be honest, I'm not even sure where. I let him navigate and drive, and didn't pay much attention. So we're about 3 hours out from Brooklyn. That's all I know. The studio we're staying in is very big, or to me, with a bedroom nook, small kitchen area, bathroom and living space. It's the only cabin for miles. He found it on Airbnb for a great price. When he told me about it, he said we'd have lots of fun with all the extra privacy. I felt excited by the twinkle in his eye. So anyway, we build a fire, and we look up at the stars, and they look different than what I've ever seen before. But what I hadn't considered was how eerie the isolation would feel. Now what's even more in this is that I can barely get a signal at all. If this post goes through, it's because I'm standing on the left side of the porch, holding my phone to the sky, and being granted a signal would be a miracle. Ryder likes it that way, the whole tiny house off the grid thing. He said we wouldn't have time to connect Wi-Fi, but the truth is, he seemed off since we arrived. The first night was fine. We got here, we unpacked. He built a fire, and we roasted some marshmallows and ate dinner. We enjoyed the aforementioned hanky-panky. Then we went to bed so we could get up and hike the next day. But then, something awoke us in the middle of the night. I woke up first, and in my groggy, sleepy state, I shook Ryder awake. He listened with me to what sounded like a hard scraping on the outside of the wall where the porch is. It really sounded as though someone was dragging a rake along the wood, over and over again. My heart was pounding on my chest. We were supposed to be completely alone out here. Why would someone be on the porch? I started to listen. I couldn't hear anything now. I was wishing we had a gun or something to protect us. I can't imagine, but worst thing come to worse, I knew we were unarmed. I whispered my fears to Ryder, who hushed me, getting out of bed, pulled on his jeans and crept over to the window. The second he peeked outside, the sound stops. I was so scared I was holding my breath. Then, to my horror, Ryder opened the door. Before I could even make a sound to protest, he stepped outside and let the door screen slam shut behind him. I laid in bed, clutching blankets to my chest, staring at his silhouette illuminated by the porch light. "There's nothing out here," he said to me. "Come back inside." I pleaded, feeling afraid to have even opened the door, but Ryder insisted on taking a look around the property. He instructed me to lock the door behind him before he started off the porch. I did as I was told, despite being gripped with fear. I thought he'd be back in a minute at most, but instead, I spent the next 20 minutes petrified, straining to listen past the sound of crickets or any sign of him. I was afraid to look out the window or open the door. I know I sounded like a coward, and maybe I am, but please understand, I've never experienced anything like this before in my life. Finally, after the longest 20 minutes of my life, I heard him come up the steps and rap on the door. "It's me," he said, and although it sounded like him, there was a strange huskiness to his voice I did not recognize. I opened the door, and Ryder came inside, not bothering to glance at me as he shook his head. I locked the door and crawled in next to him. "Do you see anything?" "Obviously not. What do you think it was? Probably the wind or something." I laughed then, because the notion was so silly. I thought he was certainly joking, but the angry look on his face at the sound of my laugh clearly told me he wasn't. "You worry too much, you know that." He never spoke to me like this before, and his words honestly shocked me. I didn't know what to say. I felt so deeply wounded by his words. I understand that I might have been overreacting because I don't understand the wilderness, but I didn't think I was being that paranoid. I definitely didn't think my fearful reaction would invoke anger upon him. "I'm sorry." I tried to apologize, but he rolled over then. Unsure what else to say, I laid down and tried to sleep. He fell asleep rather quickly. I could tell from his deep, even weird breathing. I tossed and turned for about an hour, mind feeling nervous and uncomfortable. Finally, just as I drifted off, I heard another sound. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I snapped awake, I realized it was a distant sound that seemed like it is coming from the woods behind our cabin. It took me a minute to recognize it as a voice, repeating the same thing over and over. I couldn't make out what it was saying. I expected just for it to slowly stop or be the wind, but I heard the word stop. What I realized though sent shivers down my spine. The voice sounded eerily like Ryder's. Now it only happened about 3 times and then vanished. I was absolutely paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to wake up Ryder again because one, I was terrified of him getting more angry. And what if he didn't believe me though and thought I was being paranoid again? And 2, I was honestly really afraid now, and the thought of him going out again filled me with anxious thoughts of harm coming his way. I decided the best thing I could do was lie awake on guard, listen for danger, and if I heard something, concentrate, then awake Ryder. So I laid awake all night, playing Wi-Fi free games on my phone like solitaire, fighting my tired eyes. At last, when the strings of dawn began to light the edges of the curtains, I allowed myself to drift to sleep. I woke up about 3 hours later to an empty cabin. I could see that Ryder has fixated on something and was making himself breakfast, toast and jam. The remnants set out on the kitchen table. I pulled on my coat and boots, not bothering to change out on my plaid pajamas, stepping onto the porch. Ryder wasn't anywhere in sight, but there was a small fire going and some freshly chopped wood. I figured that he was probably going out to get firewood. I turned around to go back inside. That's when I saw it. The side of the cabin was covered in long, deep, fresh scratch marks. I don't know if I screamed or cried out, but suddenly I felt hands clutch my shoulders. I turned around ready to fight. It was only Ryder, who come up behind me. Crap. Did I scare you? He said, but his voice sounded teasing, but his face was stone and serious. Why didn't you wake me when you saw the scratch marks? What do you mean? He said. Now when I tell you that my stomach dropped in that moment, I'm not kidding. I felt a chill go through me. I couldn't believe he was acting like the scratches were no big deal. It's evidence that something was on our porch last night. Seriously, Ryder, the scratches. Hey, I'm pretty sure those were there before, nothing new. I then walked over to the wall, picked at the freshly chopped wood, pointed to the shavings on the deck. I began to argue with him, but he first dismissed me, then suddenly, anger's back. I watched a chillingly dark look come over him. I never saw him look at me or anyone that way before. His teeth clenched as he moved his jaw side to side, boring holes into me with his eyes. I'm getting really sick of you trying to ruin everything. Is anything I do good enough for you? What? I said, totally confused. I could not believe what he was saying. Guess this is what I get for thinking I could be able to enjoy something for once. Maybe with you, but no. It's always go out and do the big city stuff that the girl wants. You're so high maintenance, you know that. You take, but you never give. Once again, I was deeply wounded by his words. They cut to the bone. I really can't stress enough that he's never spoke to me like this before. He's always calm and sensitive and sweet. If he had these feelings of resentment, I don't know why he'd been hiding them from me until now. Please, I swear it's not that. I was really freaking out. Could we at least maybe ride into town for the day? No, town's at least a 40-minute drive away. You look furious now. I can't take your crap anymore. I'm going for a walk, he hollered, grabs the axe and storms off into the woods. That was 2 hours ago now, and I've been sitting on my porch waiting for him to come back. I can't reach him by phone because he left his phone in the cabin and we have no service. What he did take, however, are the keys to his truck. I'm terrified that something could happen to him out there and I've got no way of getting help. I'm just stranded here, utterly trapped until he returns. I'm wrecked with anxiety. I cannot eat, and I feel sick. I'm writing this in the hopes that someone can make sense of this. I grew up in a smaller town of around 6,000 people, and my family frequently went out at night to go on walks and such. We'd never seen people out and always felt safe, so it was never a thought in my mind that something bad would happen. My parents always lectured us about not talking to strangers and being safe, especially since I'm a rather short girl. Also was around 16 or 17 at the time. We moved to a town that's actually much larger a couple of years ago, which had a bad reputation. Now one night, my mum's boyfriend had a bad stomachache and my mum's car wasn't working, so she asked me if I would go and get some Tums from the nearby gas station, which wasn't even 5 minutes away. I said yeah, 'cause I don't mind. I knew he wasn't feeling great at all. It was around 10:30 now, and dark out, I mean super dark. I pull into the gas station and go to the park entrance, and I can actually see a guy in a hoodie standing by the front door, shielding his eyes from the lights. The thing is, the headlights aren't bright at all, even when my brights are on, so I knew something was up immediately. I got out, made sure I locked my door and hurried in. They didn't even have any Tums or anything, so I leave quickly, hurrying back to my truck. I noticed that the guy is gone, and there was now a car parked directly next to mine, even though there's so many different places to park. I quickly get in and shut the door, and something told me to lock my door. Not even a second later, the guy comes from behind the other car trying to open mine, banging on the window screaming at me to let him in. I turned my truck on and sped out of there, shaking like a leaf. Ended up getting the Tums at another gas station, but I will never go to a gas station at night on my own again. I hate the feeling of knowing what could have happened if I didn't lock my doors. Now twice I've had super bad vibes pulling into a gas station. A while ago, I had an early flight leaving at 6 AM, so I was driving off to the airport parking and was very low on gas. I pull into a gas station close to the airport at around 4 AM. The station was poorly lit and I noticed there's two guys sitting outside drinking and a third guy comes out. But I was the only one at the pumps. When the third guy starts walking to my car, I realise how vulnerable I am. I drove away immediately without getting gas. Just last week, I was returning a rental car to a location in Philadelphia and needed to top up on gas. The only gas station was one that wasn't very close to where I was driving. When we eventually pulled up to the gas station, my eyes went wide. Every single pump was vandalised, broken or missing panels and signs. There was broken glass all over the parking lot. All of the doors were shuttered except for the front lone door and a weak open light. We drove right through without stopping and just returned the car without ever filling up the tank. When I was about 7 or so, I got really sick and ended up staying in the hospital for a day or so. When I finally start feeling better, my dad was allowed to take me home, so picked me up that night. It was probably just around midnight, and on the way home we stopped at a gas station. While I sat in the truck waiting for my dad to return, some guy opened the driver's side door and got in. I'm pretty sure he's about to steal the truck. That is, until he realizes I'm sitting there. He panicked and said something like, "Oh, I'm just checking the time," then got out and left. About 2 minutes later my dad got back and life was good. For whatever reason, I don't mention what happened to him until years later, but looking back, I could have easily been kidnapped or something worse. When I was younger, I worked at a gas station as an attendant. I was really hoping to do a good job as I had to impress my supervisor, but I had a few things go wrong that made him lose faith in me. One of the scariest was that there was a crazed local that drove by the station. He would actually hide out across the road. Sometimes he would start shooting at pumps. My boss was convinced that he was aiming for me, but it seemed like I was an untargeted person, and he was just trying to shoot our supplies. Paint cans and oil cans would take the most damage. I still can't figure out why he was doing this, but my god, if there was an explosion, I would be done. Not the most terrifying story, but it creeps me out when it happened a few years ago. I had just packed up the majority of my life into my car and was driving from Georgia to move back to New Hampshire where I grew up. I had stuff packed to the ceiling in the car, and so could only really see out of the window to the left. I was asleep at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere after many hours of driving. A couple of hours into my restless sleep, in my seat that couldn't recline at all due to the stuff in my car. I feel my car rocking a bit, but I'm deep enough in a sleep that I convince myself that everything's fine, but the rocking persists. Earlier in the night, long story short, when it had been pouring with rain, I had wrecked a tyre very badly because I didn't stop because of the road conditions and it's gone flat, and ended up having to put a spare donut on. Which is the main reason I decided to stop here to wait for a local mechanic to open up so I can buy a new tyre and continue on my journey. So anyway, my car is rocking back and forth when I get sudden jolts of adrenaline, realising that my car shouldn't be doing this. It's just barely morning light as I jump up to see what's happening, and I can't see anything because all of my belongings are actually blocking the view. And there stands someone who is parked next to me in a mostly empty parking lot, holding a tyre iron. They sheepishly tell me something I can't remember, saying, "Oh, we're just checking," and wondered if I want to trade the donut with theirs because theirs doesn't fit well enough, or something. Now, deep in the state of sleep stupor, where I can't string two thoughts together, I asked them if they're touching my car while I was inside. They say no. And although I wasn't clear-headed enough to be able to understand what was happening, or whether I should help them, I was sharp enough to understand that they've just lied to me. I was aware of how vulnerable and defenseless I was in that situation. I jump back into my car as quickly as I can, and drive quickly off to another area where I can find a mechanic to fix my car, and then I can stay in the parking lot there. I was working at a chain gas station, and this guy walks in and comes to the counter with 4 very large alcoholic beverages. I can see he's already lit, and I started to talk to him a bit. I was hoping he was living around the block or something, but he calmly states he is on his way somewhere that was easily 3 or 4 hours away. I thought to myself, oh no you're not. I call the police and report him as a drunk driver. They got him and he blew over 3 times the legal limit. I probably saved his life that night. I showed up to the court date, and he took the plea deal. They threw the book at him too. I was scared because I had never actively tried to do something like that before, and I'm glad I did it too. I probably saved others' lives as well as his. So I was working at a gas station, and this lady came in through the front door asking why she's having problems out of the pumps. She'd clicked the lean over the nozzle that keeps the gas pumping, but then somehow managed to pull the nozzle out of her car's receptacle. Not knowing what she was doing, she walked to the door and told me about it. I thought she had spilled a little gas on the pad, but no, she left the nozzle on the ground, spilling out gallons upon gallons. By the time I got there, it was a pool of flammable liquid. My god, I shut down the pumps and evacuate the area. Call the fire department. I say no ma'am, just get in your car and drive away, don't touch anything. The FD showed up and said wow, we've never seen anything this bad. Fortunately the gas station didn't blow up. It took actually hours to clean up the mess in the middle of an Arizona summer in 100-degree heat. I was driving through the Midwest going up to visit Mount Rushmore. I was taking minor highways most of the time because I enjoy scenic drives, but I get low on gas in western Nebraska. I drove with my gas light on for about another 20 miles by nothing but empty fields until I finally see a sign for a town called Apocaly. I turn in and see probably the most podunk town I've ever seen, and I live in the country, seriously, There's not a single car on the roads and only a couple parked randomly. I pull into a small single pump gas station and notice there's no credit card input for the pump. No big deal, I thought. So I turned and tried to get into the small service shack that was by it, but the door was locked and the lights are out. I looked through the window and the shack was completely empty, like it's been abandoned. I got into my car and tried my luck going to the next town, but my wife told me that she needed to use the restroom. So I drove down Main Street past boarded up windows and empty stores and parked at the local post office. It's closed. I was 30 minutes too late, so I started to tell her that there was absolutely nothing open in this town when I saw a door that consisted of plywood instead of glass on a shop that had a busted out window and a couple of people carrying a bag. So walked over, while being stared at the whole time by the people who came out, and pulled open the plywood door and entered a narrow, extremely dark, dirty, disorganized, particularly unstocked country store, which employed a single worker at the front who was a bigger guy. He's burly, wearing a greasy set of overalls and a trucker's hat. It's a little hard to describe, but kinda like someone out of a horror film. I asked the guy behind the counter if there's a restroom that we could use, but he either had trouble hearing what I was saying or trouble understanding. I completely said the same thing twice until finally he understood and told me in the thickest country accent possible that it's in the back. He then repeats himself, giving an extremely detailed direction of how I could get to it, when I can literally see it where I'm standing. He then proceeds to repeat himself for a third time, going into peculiar detail, explaining things I may face on the floor and ceiling when I go in there. I finally thank him and walk to the back, and sure enough, there were dirty, dusty boxes of empty, used cleaning supplies thrown about everywhere like he had described to me, along with other things on the floor and ceiling. I opened it, and the sight made a truck stop bathroom look like a palace. Luckily, my wife did not notice the half-dozen roaches scurrying off, probably because of the darkness, but she did notice mold everywhere, and the puddle of an unknown substance on the floor, and the 50 or so empty toilet paper rolls strewn about on the floor. I asked her if she's okay, and she pleasantly told me that, yeah, I'm fine, I really need to go. I started walking around the store while constantly being silently stared at by the front guy. I grabbed a bottle of water to buy. I always wanted to buy something if I used the restroom of a place. My wife then comes out of the restroom. I told him that we did everything we needed, and I paid for the water and leave with him staring at us. As we walked out, there were a few people across the street having a conversation, but immediately stop and stare at us. So I ignore them the best I can, got in the car and start driving off. But I noticed a car parked at the one pump as I passed it fueling. I did not care though. I just got out of that town and gone as quick as I could into the next one over. I eventually ran out of gas, but luckily I've made it to another pump. So we were driving to Virginia in the early 90s. It was about midnight and my father pulls into a rest stop as my mum needs to use the bathroom. He dropped her off in front and went to park. I made my way inside and stopped. A huge man had my tiny mother over his shoulder and was calmly walking to the other exit. My mother didn't make a sound. I will never forget the look on her face, which is shocked mixed with fear. I screamed so loud my father has just come in, saw what was happening, ran after the man. The dude then put my mother down and just walked out of the building. We sat in the car waiting for the police to arrive. My mum said he grabbed her soon after she walked in. He was inside the ladies' room, apparently waiting for a victim. The lights were off and my mum walked in. We spent a night at a nearby motel. My parents went to the police station in the morning so my mum could try and identify him but can't find anyone. We made a new rule in my family. No one could use a rest stop bathroom without at least one other family member being there. I was with my dad on our way to New York City, and we stopped at a gas station very early in the morning, around 8 AM. I was very young at the time, around 7, and I was sitting in the back seat of the car with my Walkman and headphones on, playing Pokemon Red on my Game Boy Color. As I'm sitting there, he goes inside to pay for the gas and get a few snacks for the trip. During this, a very, very old man walks over to the car, opens the door and sits in the front seat. I had no idea, being so young, what was happening, so I just sat there. After about 3 minutes of this, a 40-year-old man runs out of the gas station screaming, "There's something wrong with the car!" The man still sat there. He says, "Come on, get out. I'm so sorry, this is my father," and he's a little confused. After a few more attempts, the man finally gets up, and to this day, I still have no idea why I didn't say anything. I actually had multiple weird experiences in my years working as a gas station attendant. Now, I lived in one of the gas stations that's basically in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I had to drive at least 45 minutes to get there, which doesn't sound like much, but you imagine if you're driving and all you can see is trees around you and fields. With the way this gas station was set up, it wasn't like a chain one, it was privately owned, and that meant they didn't like spending money if they didn't have to. So I would almost always be working there alone. Now we would get the odd weird people that would come in on a regular basis. There was one particularly strange woman who would speak another language, break into perfect English, then start trying to give you a lollipop. She would do this to all the other workers who would try and ignore her, just trying to get a hot chocolate, but she would always end up thrusting the lollipop into them. If not, she would just throw it into their faces. Now, I wasn't really big enough to be able to deal with this myself, and annoyingly nobody else helped her or got her out of the building for me, so we usually waited until she left. There was another very bizarre person who would wear very heavy winter clothes whenever it was hot outside or in the middle of summer. He would have sunglasses too, and always wore exactly the same clothes on. You would see him multiple times a day, and I just don't understand how he was walking so far or where he was going. Maybe he was a crazy guy who lived out in the woods, but I presume he was just an alcoholic. But you can imagine seeing somebody walking past every single day with the exact same clothes on, walking like they're on a mission, never actually acknowledging anyone. I went outside to smoke once and he actually completely ignored me, which I thought was really strange because I did try and make efforts to talk to him, and he always glances over at me. One of the weirdest people I'd seen too was when I went outside to smoke at about 2 AM at night quickly, and don't worry, I wasn't near the actual pump, so it was safe. And no one was in the shop too, so I was actually doing my job fine. So there's this guy that screams at me from the side of the road, "What time is it?" I drop my cigarette and just freeze. What time is it? What does he mean? He shouts again. I turn to my left and I can see that he's carrying a really big box of sticks. Literally just sticks you'd find on the ground. I tell him this time and he says thank you. He then repeats this 3 or 4 times as he's walking into the distance. He literally continues this until I can't see him anymore. Yeah, pretty weird. One that actually scared me the most though was a time that my car had broken down and I was waiting for one of my friends to come and fix it. I'd already finished my shift and the other worker had actually taken over and was in the shop, so I could just wander around for a bit. I guess being stuck in the same place makes you start to lose your mind, so I just have a walk along the road. There was one particular route that I would always follow which led to an abandoned church. I never actually went inside it, but it was a nice walk and you didn't feel too scared there at night for some reason. Maybe I'd lost my mind to all the weirdo interactions I had, but anyway, I'd walked about 20 minutes down the road when, out of the corner of my eye, I can see a strange torchlight. Now it's not like a conventional flashlight, it's more like an actual flame. It's about half a mile away from me, but I can see it. Just as I'm stopping to figure out what this is, thinking maybe it's a car or something in the tree line, I realise there's multiple of these, and they're all walking in one direction. Now I can tell they're people because of the way that this bobs up and down, but I can't make out much else because it's pitch black now between me and them. And what's worse is I'm under a street light, so they're definitely going to be able to see me. They don't make a sound, but there's probably about 10 of them at least, all walking in the same direction, about an equal distance away from each other. I don't take time to try and figure out what this is. I tried to take a picture, but you can't actually see anything because it's so far away, and the night mode is so bad on my phone. I decide to quickly hurry back. I report what's happened to my friend, and he says, yeah, you see some crazy things out here, but this is the last that I'd ever seen of them. Now, I wanted to tell you them just to give you an idea of how many weird people are actually out here where I was working. For some reason though, I was pretty fearless to it all. Now, there was one night in particular that I'll never forget when I was working. Every so often, I would hear a scream sound coming from behind where I was. It's hard to describe exactly what it was. I was pretty sure it was an animal, but I couldn't be sure. Needless to say, I didn't go outside to smoke that night. It was terrifying, but eventually went to normal because I got used to it. Even one of the local weirdos that come in mentioned it to me and said it was really strange. I said, yeah, I know. Thinking, well, maybe this guy's actually normal, he immediately said to me, did you see the police chase and all the helicopters and cars going past? No, I didn't. Crazy. He said, yeah, it was literally 2 minutes ago. How did you miss it? Grabs his stuff and runs off. There was definitely no police chase, at least. But at least somebody else had heard what was happening. Everything goes back to normal, and I forget about the screaming sounds. Eventually my shift is over, and somebody comes to take over from me and says, hey, have you seen what the police are doing? I say, what police? Flashing back to my interaction earlier, I think maybe that guy was correct, and maybe, just maybe, there was something going on. I quickly head outside and we can see multiple police all surrounding a building that I didn't even notice was there. These are full SWAT police, or I think they are. They've all got guns drawn and they're hiding in the woods and in the fields. I can also see sniper squads there. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I don't know what's happening, and my friend doesn't too. I stayed for about another 30 minutes trying to figure out what was going on from my car. I can see the police slowly advancing on this building, but I have no idea what they were doing. Eventually I drive home and I'm met by my mother, who tells me, God, thank God you're okay. I've been calling you for hours trying to see if you're alright. I say, what has happened? She says, somebody took someone hostage in that building just next to where you worked, and the police have just rescued them. They sent firing squads in and sniper teams to try and save them. I suddenly realised the screams that I heard must have come from a woman who had been kidnapped. The whole time, I was completely oblivious to it and thought it was a normal animal sound, or someone's being held hostage. It's an experience that I've never forgot since this day, but what really worries me is that I was walking around that place multiple times on my own at night, not realising that within the following days somebody was about to get kidnapped. I was gonna hear it and not realise what was happening, and I thought they were normal sounds. Every single time I look at that building now, I get flashbacks and get chills down my spine knowing what took place there. I'm gonna quit my job soon too, because I don't like working that close to somewhere like that. Thank God it didn't happen to me in that gas station. I think the only thing that was a saving grace for me is the fact that multiple people, weird or not, go into the gas station, and maybe whoever done this thought there was cameras there, but there's none. Since this day, I've always been much more cautious and always had my phone next to me, so if anything like that happens again, I can quickly call the police. I work as a cashier at a grocery store, and nothing about this night would have stuck out to me if it wasn't for this event. I had till 7 PM to close shift, and the store closed at 12 AM. I clock in, and everything's the same old. However, early in my shift, I had a younger guy, probably mid-20s, come in. He grabs a soda from the cooler, nothing special that sticks out in my mind. So my break time comes around 9 PM. I go to the back to lock out, and then head out. I go to call my boyfriend at the time, and as I'm walking out, I saw the same younger guy that I rang up the soda for over an hour ago at the lottery ticket machine. Okay, whatever. He's bored. It's not uncommon to see the same customer coming back for a second time. I make my call, and my brake's about to go up, so I clock back in. I get on my lane and look over to the lottery machine, and he's gone. Fast forward about 30 minutes before closing. I'm cleaning up. And guess who I see over at the same machine? Yep, shady soda guy. We make brief eye contact, and he walks out the store. Over the next 15 minutes, I get so busy cleaning and making sure that the store is ready for the day shift that I forget all about the soda guy. Time to clock out, so I do so. I usually wait and walk out with the office checker and the security guard, but on this particular shift, I don't know the security guard and don't care too much for the office checker on duty, so I walk out without waiting. As I get out, I head to my minivan. As per company policy, I had to park at the end of the lot so customers can get closer to the store. As I make it halfway to my van, I see a weird blacked out car taking up 2 spaces in front of my van. And there's another in the distance. I start walking up faster with my key in hand. As I get closer to the car, I see 4 people in the car, then 2 doors open, and somebody steps out, wearing all black, the soda guy. By the grace of God, or whatever you believe in, before they fully got out the car, the security officer checker come walking out of the store, and they quickly get back in their car, literally speeding off. I don't even see a license plate. The security guard stopped and looked at me like he didn't know what was going on. I was freaking out, so rushed the rest of the way home, crying my eyes out. My brain, even after all these years, doesn't know how to process this. Was I overreacting? Was I about to be abducted? I still don't like thinking about it because it makes me tear up.